So I've gotten some questions on this channel about how I make my historical and ahistorical maps. This video is going to cover how to do so using Photoshop and a new map I'm making for the channel. If there's demand, I'll make another video on how to make maps in free programs like Microsoft Paint or Paint.net, which I've also used before. Make sure to subscribe if you're interested in that sort of thing. Okay, so step number 0 to making a map is to have an idea. Any good map isn't just a matter of artistry or presentation, but it's also half about the concept. You want a compelling hook to bring in your audience. It doesn't necessarily have to be original. For example, the map that I'm going to make is 1984. Okay, so let's go with that idea. What next? Okay, so step number 1 to making a map in Photoshop is to get a base map. Now there's two types of base maps you can get. You can get a pixel-based base map, which you can find on alternatehistory.com on the forum. So if you go to maps and graphics right there, you can find a map resources thread right here. This will present you a whole bunch of nice resources for pixel-based maps in size order here. So micro world A, let's click on that. And then you can see that this map is pretty small, right? There's also VTBAM, which is going to be the largest, and I'll put a Google Docs link to the VTBAM maps, which are pretty large, so large in fact that they're no longer really pixel maps. But if you want a bigger sort of map, you can access old archival cartographical books, right? So you can go on Wikimedia, and this is a good source for maps. So for example, if we type in Italy map 1800s, make sure you spell things right, of course. Italy map 1800s, and then look at this. We have all sorts of maps that can be used to create, let's say, an alternate history or a history map about Italy in the 1800s. So let's say I don't find what I want on Wikimedia. I could instead go to davidrumsey.com, and this is a massive website filled with all sorts of maps. Now, 1984, which is the concept of the map, is going to be a post-World War II map, and I'm going to go with the idea that World War II went differently, so I want a map, maybe 1930s, a world map that would look good on a global scale, because 1984 has 3 big super states, so I want those to be depicted. Okay, so here I found a good map which fits the requirements of the map that I want to make. So this is a Mercator projection map, which unfortunately gives a lot of space to Greenland, but maybe I can just cut it off or something like that. The map is in 1923, so it's before the Second World War, and it has a whole bunch of cities. Now, it's not as detailed as I want, but you know what? The less detail that's in the map in the first place, that's the less labor I have to put in later on and put all, a million little cities all over the place. So this is pretty good. This is a good base map for the map that I want to make. Okay, one little hack you could do once you find your map is to open it up in Paint first. That way, now it's going to strain my computer a whole lot because it's a ginormous map in Paint. But, okay, so what you can do is you can Control A to select all of it and Control C to copy it. That way it's on your clipboard, and when you open up Photoshop, the dimensions are already set in as an option. Okay, so I've opened Photoshop and I'm going to click Create New. Okay, and as you can see, my clipboard right there has the dimensions of my actual map. Now the width and the height options over here on the right side, they don't really matter too much in other cases because you can change the width and the height once you open up Photoshop. The resolution also doesn't really matter too much if you're not going to print it in real life or something like that. Okay, so once you open up Photoshop, you're going to see on the right over here your layers. Now I have one layer so far, and it's the background. That's how it's supposed to be. And on the left over here, you're going to see all the different tools you have. Okay, then I'm going to do Control V and paste in the layer from Paint. Now the reason I selected it and pasted it from Paint is because the alternative is just dragging that in, and sometimes it can get warped or you can lose resolution if you do that sort of thing. So the Paint copy paste method is a good way around that. Okay, now if you zoom in, you can see that I've got a whole bunch of detail. It's okay if it's a little bit pixelated since I'm going to be creating layers over top of it. Okay, so by pressing Control-Shift-New, I can create a new layer, and it's going to be land. Now there's a few different ways to create your land layer, and that's going to be what you put all sorts of effects on, like this coastline here. Maybe you want to put an internal beach sort of line. But there's different ways to create it. So the number one way that I like to create it is by using the pencil tool over here. So by zooming in, you can go to the side, and it's always good to start your land over the edge of the frame. That way when you create the frame, you're not necessarily going to be bound by where the land is. You have more freedom. And since the land is beneath the frame, it's all right. Okay, so starting off, I'm just going to start tracing. Now, this is a little secret, but the actual coast, the course of the coast, doesn't really necessarily matter too much. So you can be a little bit sloppy. No one's going to notice because guess what? The original cartographers who made this map were also being a little bit sloppy. So now I've traced my first sort of island here. It's not literally an island, but basically functionally it is. Then I'm going to press G for the paint bucket and make sure that it's contiguous up here and just paint it in. There we go, we have our first land. Now, there's some dots on the edges that I want to fill in, but that's the number one way. And then basically, you just keep doing that until all the land on the whole map is taken up. It's going to take some time, so maybe you could listen to a podcast or something. Now, the other option on how to do this is to use the curvature pen tool. So what you do is you plop your first point, doesn't really matter where, but let's say outside. And then you basically trace through. Now this curvature shape I'm creating is filled in with the color black. Doesn't have to be at first because you can always fill it in later by changing the options up at the top of the screen. It might be a bit annoying that it fills in a little bit, so in the middle of it you can go up and get rid of that fill. See? But afterwards you want to fill it in, and then there you go. Now the problem is that the curvature pen tool is a bit resource intensive on your computer. So by making a whole world map using the curvature pen tool, your computer might slow down a whole lot. I prefer the pencil tool just because of that reason. Okay, so I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. Okay, and then like 15 minutes afterward, I'm done with North America as a continent. So you zoom out and you can see that I've traced the whole thing. So pressing G, I can paint that in. Oh, so as you can see, I have made a mistake. Now, when that happens, you can just press Ctrl Z to undo it. And then you gotta zoom in and trace through the whole coast to find where you made the mistake. Now it helps if you minimize your base map. That way you just have this coastal, yep, there it is. Let's try again by pressing G and paint, and then there you go. So this is North America filled in. Now, as you can see, I am missing some islands. So what you gotta do is you gotta do that again. And then for Europe and Africa and Asia, you do the same thing. But once you fill that in, it's good to have lakes because, lakes exist. So what you can do is you can lower the opacity of your land and then press E to do the minimize. And you can do left, right bracket to increase or decrease, and you zoom in and you just start minimizing from it. There you go. So you do that until you have all your lakes filled out. And again, it doesn't really matter how accurate you are, as long as you're pretty accurate. Let's do 80% accuracy. That should be what you should strive towards. And the bigger your little eraser is, the worse it might look. So the smaller you are, the more accurate. There you go, see it like this. So tracing around Lake Superior, there's an island in Lake Superior. So what you could do is you could then surround that island with the eraser, see? And then you select Using W, select, make sure it's contiguous, then you delete. And there you go, you've deleted the land there. You select the land over here and delete, and then erase this. Or another way to draw islands in lakes is you just go back, press B for the pencil tool, and just pencil it in again. So that way, when we increase the opacity, there you go, now you got a lake there. See? Okay, after about an hour and a half, I have completed my land. As you can see, I have erased out the rivers, like for example right here, and I have speckled in the land. Okay, the next step is to add effects onto the land. Now, conceivably, what you could do is you could select everything outside the land. Since it's contiguous, let's make it non-contiguous, select everything. Create a new ocean layer, and then paint that in. We can select blue or something so that it looks like the ocean, right? Conceivably, we could do this. But one thing I might prefer to do instead for this map is to just make the base map blue. And when you erase that, as you can see, when you hide it, you have an ocean layer. And I don't really like this bright blue color, so I'm gonna change it to something more neutral. Let's try, yeah, there we go. That's all right. Now what I'm gonna do is add effects onto the land. So I want the land to be white. I want it to have a coastal layer, a coastal stroke on it so that it looks like a beach line, that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to do is double click on the land layer, and then I have an interface where I could add all sorts of effects. Those effects are going to be stroke, which is basically a line. You could do the line inside, outside, or on the actual border of your object, of your layer. Or you could do color overlay, which is pretty straightforward. It creates a color overlay. Gradient overlay creates a gradient overlay. I don't really like that so much with this sort of map. Pattern overlay might be good if you want to create stripes. Now, the issue is with creating stripes that there's no default stripe option in Photoshop. So you're going to have to actually create the stripe on your own. The way you do that is, here, I'll show you right now. You do Control New, create a new Photoshop document, but instead of making it large, you make it maybe 1 pixel by, let's do 10 pixels, right? Then you create this new document, you zoom in, and you have this tiny line. So you hide the background. Well, first you gotta create a new layer, then you hide the background, and then you paint half of it the color you want. Let's do width of 5, and then bam. So then you just select all of it, and do edit, define pattern. And we name the pattern, I don't know, stripe bluish. Then when you go back to your original Photoshop document and you click land, you could add a stroke. You could add a stripe on top of everything. And here is what that looks like with the pattern we just created. There we go. Now I don't really like that. What you could do instead is create a stroke on the outside of your object. Okay, so here we have the land layer with 2 strokes. One stroke is this sort of grayish, bluish purple. It's around 10 pixels on the outside, and then there's an additional stroke about 40 pixels large beneath it, but I've defined instead of a color, a pattern, and the pattern was the one that was created in the separate document. But I don't really like this so much, so what I'm going to instead do is change the colors around and add a different sort of sequential stroke system where it looks kind of like a puddle, like a splash in a puddle, so I'll do that. Okay, so here we have land, which I've put a white cover overlay on top of, so it looks white. And then I have added a series of strokes on the outside. So the first stroke is this color, then twice the width of that I've added another stroke, which is the color of the background, then another stroke of the dark color, then another stroke of the light color, then another stroke of the dark color. In the second two, I decreased the opacity so that they're a bit more transparent, so that the background lighter color shines through. That way it looks like they're decreasing or they're lightening up as you go. And this I just prefer over adding a single thing because it looks a bit nice, and it kind of has an interesting effect where the land meets each other, so it has these rings. Now theoretically speaking, what you could do is you could add complexity to the land. So if you say used a smaller pencil tool, the land would look more detailed and stuff like that. Now another thing you could do, this is a bit of a trick, is if you wanted to change the way your borders look so they look smoother as a whole, but before I get into that, here's a little bit of an error. There should be land there, so I just colored in, no big deal. Okay, so what if you wanted to do, if you wanted the borders to be more smooth, is you could select all of your land, right click it and make it a work path. Tolerance is 1 pixels. Then that work path you can do edit, define custom shape, and you could just make that shape land, whatever. And then you could drag that custom shape in by doing polygon, custom shape tool, and up and select that land. Okay, so here we go. Just any second now I'll be able to do it. Ay. Okay, there we go. Pretty close. This is kind of like that scene in Interstellar, you know? We'll shift it up so it closely matches. There we go. And so we copy the layer style from our original thing and paste it here and then hide the land. Okay, so here we have land that's a bit more smoothly shaped because it was converted from a pencil drawing into a curvature line drawing. And you know what, I kind of like the look of this a lot better. Okay, the next step to making this map is to add the rivers. Since the land is kind of blank looking, I want to plug in a whole bunch of rivers so it looks less boring. So in order to do that, what we could do is we could use the pencil tool and create a new layer for rivers and basically just trace them in. Now the color, I think a good baseline is to make the color of your rivers the color of your coastline. That way it looks pretty good, you know. Go like this, see, like that. But because a pencil drawn river wouldn't really match the style of our curvature line borders, I'm going to instead use the curvature line tool to draw the rivers. So in order to look at the base map and do that at the same time, you just need to decrease the fill of your land layer here. That way you can see what's underneath it, which is layer 1, which is the base map. Gotta load. Oh, and of course you also have to remove the color overlay too if you got a cover overlay. There we go. Okay, so one thing you got to watch out with these sorts of maps is that the rivers might look similar to the roads if there's any roads, but you can kind of tell the difference by one, being familiar with the world's rivers, and two, looking at the details. So for example, in this base map, the roads are kind of smooth while the rivers are more jagged. So what we're going to do is just start tracing using the line tool. Now I'm going to start off with no fill because rivers aren't filled in, but a stroke. Now the stroke I'm going to set to be, how about 4? And then we just start tracing. So let's start on the edge and just go in like this.
Who shall withstand the power of God?
Now, one thing you want to watch out for is if you make a mistake, for example, clicking over here, you can either hover over the node and drag it into place, or you can just press Ctrl Z. Now, if you click away by accident, let's say if you click on the wrong layer and go back, what you can do is click on the line and just start tracing it again. Okay, now at this point the river is starting to shrink down on the map, and I like it when the river tapers out. So what you can do is click away, and then start a new one, which is just smaller. Now if you start editing this, it's going to edit the original river, which I'll just name Mississippi so you get a sense of what it is. So click escape, and then just start anew. Now that you've pressed escape though, let's see if it changes the width. Yep, see, it shrunk it. So press Ctrl Z to undo it, and then just start a new one like this. And then once you start a new one, you can shrink the size. And then if the two lines, when they match up, don't really look good, what you could do at the end is rasterize it. That way, if you remember, it can be changed by your pencil tool and just, you know, shave it down or widen it using the pencil tool. That's kind of fine to do. Okay, so we've reached the end. Okay, now let's put the color overlay back on and see, you know, that doesn't look too bad, but maybe I want to shave down the end of the Mississippi River. So what I could do is right click and click rasterize, and then zoom in and then kind of shave it down so it's a sharp point. Yeah, like that. So then it looks a little bit better. Yeah. A little too harsh though, so let's zoom in and edit it again. Yeah, okay. And then back where they meet, maybe I want to just do that. Oh, because it's the Mississippi that I'm changing, I gotta rasterize that and erase it. There you go. So there you go, there's one river, and then you just gotta do the rest of the whole planet. Now, conceivably you could save yourself some work by just doing the big rivers, and that's what I might do. Okay, and here is what the rivers look like once they're almost done. Now, if you notice, what I've done is I've started each of the rivers at the coastline, but for the example where rivers pass through lakes, like for example when the river pools and creates a lake, I've just had to go right over it. Now conceivably, here's an example of that. Conceivably, if you had an ocean layer, you could put that on top of the land layer to cover up, on top of the river layer and the land layer, and then cover up these rivers. But what I'm instead going to do is first rasterize all the rivers, then merge them. Here I've already done that on the side, so they're now editable objects, so I can just erase it like that. And what I'm going to do is select everything using the wand tool, select everything outside the land, make sure it's non-contiguous, and just delete from the rivers. And there you go. So now the rivers no longer run in the middle of my little lakes. Now an additional thing you could do is look through to see if there's any little things you don't like. For example, over here, this river doesn't exactly come up to this lake. So what I'm going to do is take my pencil tool and just go in like that. Just because when the eye looks over these sorts of things, it notices if there's a white gap. Okay, so the next thing to do is to add latitude and longitude lines. Now this map projection, luckily enough, is straight. So let's add in the base map so we can see these latitude and longitude lines, and let's even hide the land and hide the rivers. Now what you're going to want to do is click up to your top layer so it's not hidden, and then take your curvature pen tool and zoom in. Now in a different map projection, these latitude and longitude lines are going to be curved, but this one is straight. So what I'm going to do is just plop a point, then do Control Shift and scroll on over to the other side and just plop down the other point. And then when I scroll back, you can see it's not exactly straight, but you know what, it's fine, not a big deal. Now if it was a different map projection where there was a curvature along the latitude or longitude, what you do is you just scroll to the middle, which would be about over here, and just drag it down. That way if it's curved, you have a curve. Then you just do that over and over again. And now, just like drawing the original land layer, you're going to want your latitude and longitude lines to be behind the frame in the first place. That way when you put the frame over, there's not necessarily a limit to it. And then you just do that over and over again. Okay, and this is what it looks like with the initial completed latitude and longitude. So what you're going to first want to do, like I said with the rivers, is select all of them. So you can just do shift click, and then you've selected all of them. Right click, rasterize, then right click, and merge layers. Okay, so this is what it looks like when completed. Then let's bring back in the rivers, our land layer, and let's hide the base map so we can see the ocean underneath. And this is what it looks like. So I like how it looks. It does look a little bit too dark, so what I can do is I can just decrease the opacity. There we go, something like that. And if you wanted to, you could even hide it underneath your land layer. That way you just have the latitude and longitude on the ocean. This kind of looks good, but I do like how it looks when it's over top of the land. So let's put it back. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then step 3 of making a map is to add your countries. Now in this map, and this is why I picked it, I do have the countries of 1923 or whenever the map was. And then what I could just do is I can start making these. Now there's 3 ways to make countries in Photoshop. 3 main ways. The first way is to use the curvature pen tool. So what you can do is you can create a new layer. Let's label it Germany. And then you just go in and trace the borders of Germany. So let's go like this. Now, because we're going to be deleting everything outside of land, you can just go out into the ocean. So like this. Now one thing is that if your country has any sharp lines, what you can do is convert point tool and just convert that into a more sharp line. Now I don't really like how that looks, so what you can do is you can do add anchor point tool, hover over your line and add an additional anchor point. Now if you click and hold, you're going to get this stretching sort of interface right here. I don't necessarily need that, so I'm just going to zoom in, plop it originally, and then drag it up. Likewise over here, click and then drag. This is alright. Click, shift. Now at this point it's just a line, so I want to add a fill. So let's do this grayish color, and there you go, that's our first Germany. So this is going to be the internal color of the state. So what I'm going to do is duplicate that layer, duplicate layer, get rid of the fill, and then change the stroke. Let's change it to black. And then what I'm going to do is this is going to become the German border. So let's just rename that layer, and let's change the border to a dotted option. And on the other hand, I don't like how it goes right up to the edge, and I don't like how it's the same color as the rivers. So what I can just do is click on the original internal Germany, click on the pencil tool, click on the curvature line tool, and select a different color. Let's just go with a regular old gray. There we go. Oh, it's hovering. If you see right here, it's extending outward because the internal Germany has a border still. So let's get rid of that border. No border. There we go. Now it kind of looks better. So what I'm also going to do is rasterize both of them. Rasterize layer, and select everything outside my land and delete that from the 2 Germanys. And there you go. So now we're starting to get a good looking country. Now here we see that I want my border to go right up to these rivers, and I don't want the line to trespass over it into France. So I'm going to select everything outside the rivers. But see, there's the problem. Because it's a fuzzy line, when I select outside of it, I'm missing some parts of it which are slightly transparent. So what I can instead do is just erase the border where I don't want it to be. So along this river, which is the Rhine River. There we go. And just paint on in using the pencil tool underneath, and careful not to go too far. Make sure you got the right color. And there you go. And then since it kind of looks like it's going over a little bit, I could just erase it like there. There you go. So now it lines up better with this river. So any rivers over here? Nope. There you go. So now we have Germany Draft 1. I don't really like it too much, so what I'm going to do is actually make it so it has an internal border, an internal stroke. Okay, I like this a lot better. So we got our one country there, and then we basically just do that for every single other country. So I've made some progress on making the countries. So as you can see, I got Central Europe and Northern Europe down, and some of this too. The reason I'm showing this at this very moment is because I don't really like how the lakes look. So what I can just do is click my Finland interior layer and just paint on in. There we go. So now there's not all these blobs right in the middle of the country. And then conceivably I do the rest for other places. But I also notice that there's this white line in between countries, and that's because the countries have a bit blurry edges. So as a result, the blurriness creates some confusion and a thin white line. So what I can just do is I can go to my Poland layer, Poland interior. Well, actually first let's go to, click outside the Poland interior. That's everything outside Poland now. Go to Germany, do East Prussia interior. Now I can go like this. Let's erase, and bam, now it's right against the Polish border. But I don't want it to go into the ocean, so let's create a smaller pencil and just go like this. And then the same for the rest of Germany. Okay. So now that's fixed, and I can just do that for the rest. Now the problem though is that this method takes a while. It works great if you are, for example, making a map of Europe and you have the time to make all the little countries, but since I'm making a world map, it's going to take a long time to do this method for all these tiny little countries all over the place, especially because, you know, the 1920s, 1930s aren't really the subject of the map, but, you know, 1984. This is just to show the background of the map. That's option 1. Option 2 is to create penciled in countries. So let's name this Germany 2. We'll hide the other Germanys and hide our land. There we go. And this new Germany, we'll just use the pencil tool to pencil on in like this. And it's the same sort of principles we used for editing what we had with the curvature line tool. This map doesn't really look too good in the first place, so it kind of looks a bit funky. But hey, if you're not an expert on the cartography of early 1900s Germany, you know, maybe it's not so bad. Okay, so we just color in the rest of it. Now, ideally, you'd research whether or not these islands are actually German. I don't think they are. I think they're Danish. Okay, then paint that in. Then we select everything outside our land layer and delete it from this second Germany. There we go. Then we could add the same effects. There we go. And even what we could do, if we really wanted to, is select it, do a convert to work path, then create a custom shape from that, and then drag that shape in to get these dotted borders like this. Conceivably, you could do that. Okay, the third option for creating country borders is to duplicate your land layer. So let's duplicate it. Then let's clear the effects, clear the layer style. Then we get this. It'll take a second to load. Okay, so now I have a duplicate land layer, and I'm just going to make this countries, and what I could do is apply some effects to it. So for example, an internal stroke and a border stroke, stuff like that. Let's do color. Let's make it dark gray for a border. And there we go. Now we got something like this. Then we zoom in. And let's make it have no fill so we can see what's underneath it. And then we just erase. Then we just take 1 pixel, or maybe let's do 5, and erase for the country borders. There we go. Now we got 1 country, and you just keep going. And then let's plug in our land. And there we go. We got 1 country. So this doesn't really look that good, but that's another option you could do. Okay, and here is the end result of doing the erase method. I think it looks pretty good. The borders look a little bit silly here and there, but you know what? For this sort of thing where the actual point of the map is not to replicate 1920s borders of Europe, I think it works pretty well. Now, if I were to do a focused project on this sort of thing, I would, 1, look for a more accurate base map because, you know, I hate to throw the base map under the bus, but it could be a little bit better. It's a little bit mushy. I'll use that word, mushy. But for my purposes, it works pretty well because it has the countries of the world and it has the cities as well. Okay, so the next step is to add the accoutrements. So that's going to be the cities. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new layer for cities. And I'll put that above all of them since I want it to be above latitude and longitude, and it should definitely be above rivers. And then I'm going to add some effects to the cities. Now, the best way I find to make cities is to use the pencil tool and just plop them down like this. Bigger cities should be a bigger pencil plop, while smaller cities should be smaller. Let's hide the countries so we can see the land better. So for example, Los Angeles is a pretty big city. It is going to get a 25 point pencil plop. Now, this doesn't really look so good because it's just a blue blob. So what I'm going to do is add internal strokes so that the bigger city plops have more lines in them than the smaller city plops. That way, the lines communicate the size of the city. And then when I make the plopper smaller to 15 pixels, there you go, it doesn't have the little dot in the middle. When I make it 20, it doesn't either. And then let's say I make it bigger to 30 or 35, it looks bigger. So there we go, we have the 3 different size cities I can plop down. I'll do 20 instead of 15. So large cities, medium cities, small cities. Okay, and this is what the completed cities look like. So I am going to show the countries layer, and show the land layer, and then hide the background so we can see the ocean. And then on the countries, I'm going to make sure that the color overlay is present. And there you go. This is what the completed cities look like. Now, conceivably, what you could also add is roads, if your map has roads, and other sorts of stuff. But with the skills that you've learned so far, I think you could probably pretty easily do those things. Okay, the next step is to add the labels and the frame. So the labels are pretty easy to add. So what you just do is you zoom in, press T. Let's not make it tan. Let's pick a regular old color for fonts. And instead of 200 points, let's make it 80 to start off. And let's change the font to Century Gothic. I like that one. And let's just type Moscow. Now 80 is still pretty big. I think the 80 point font is based upon the resolution thing you selected at the beginning. So it might not be 80 for you, but 80 for me is pretty ginormous. So I'm going to try to do 8. That's too small, so I'm going to do 16. That's pretty good. Now, when I bring back the white color, that looks pretty good. So then you just do that for the whole thing. Now for Photoshop, you can also add a curvature effect to the text. So for example, let's zoom out. Let's say I want to put big old Soviet Union across all of Russia. So I'm going to type Soviet Union. Now it's going to be in all caps, so it differentiates from the lowercase city names. Then once I have the layer selected, I'm going to click up here, this curvature thing. Then I like to do the arc, and then I will, well, first let's make it a larger size. Select all of it. Let's do 160s to start off with. That actually works pretty well. Let's twist it around a little bit. Not like that, like this. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, because it's covering up everything underneath, I'm going to make it a little opaque. So let's do 50s to start off with. Okay, that's great. Now, if your land layer you have, okay, let's keep it 50. I don't know why I went back. There we go. Click away. There we go. Okay, so if the land layer you have has bumps or all sorts of stuff all over it, what you could do is you can add a stroke on the outside of your labels so that they appear more visible against your complicated land layer. But because my land layer is just a solid white color, it's not so hard to see the label. So I'm going to keep that as it is. Maybe even make it a little bit more transparent and move it out of the way of the major cities over there. That's better. And then you can do that for all the other countries. Okay, the next step for the accoutrements is to add the frame. Now with the frame, you're going to want to make sure that you're more aggressive towards the interior than not. That way you claim all the longitude and latitude lines within your frame so they don't stop before they reach the edge. Now, what you could do is you could use this as your starting point, but because the way Photoshop works, if you do strokes on the interior, or even if you make this your frame, make it invisible, and then add strokes this way, it's going to create a curved line here, right? So what you're instead going to want to do is start this point right here as the corner of your frame, and then add strokes outside into this space. That way, the corner is sharp and not curved. So let's select, let's create a new frame layer. And let's select all this space this way. Okay, so there we go. We have the white frame, and now we're going to be building inside. So we're probably going to do a stroke layer of, let's say, well, first, this is an issue because if you notice here that this corner meets that corner, but when I go straight across, it doesn't meet this corner. So I'm going to want to extend the frame inside by clicking here, and there we go. So you hover across and paint that white. Then if you go down here, yep, see, same issue here. But you know what? This doesn't really matter because this is so far away from the ocean that it's fine. When I fill this in, I'm going to select a white box and just cover it all up. Okay, so to build the frame inside, you're going to probably want a 5 pixel line here, 10 white, 20 black, 10 white, 5 black, something like that. And now, of course, these are additive, so it's going to be 5, 15, so on. Okay, let's do that. Okay, now the frame is basically complete. So I have a bunch of strokes building up from the edge inward, like this. Now let's hide the background layer so we can make sure that all the longitudes and latitudes are covered up. And if you look at that, they are. Okay, but now I want to make a little info box here. So what I'm going to do is basically do the same thing. Okay, so now we've got our frame done. We've got our cities and our countries and our ocean and our land and the labels too. Now, I just have to make 1984. Okay, Okay, I'll talk more about this in the actual video itself, but the premise of 1984 is that the world is divided between three major superstates. There's Eurasia, which controls Europe and Northern Asia, East Asia, which controls, East Asia, and then Oceania, which controls Britain, the Americas, and some of the British colonies across the world. So because of that, I'm not going to really use this base map here, the base map I created of the countries in the 1920s. That I could kind of use in the course of the video to communicate the rise to power of these new superstates, but the superstates themselves are kind of so big that these original borders don't really matter too much. So I'm going to actually hide them for now. There we go, and the label of the Soviet Union, I'm just going to delete that for now. Okay, I want to use the dashed borderline, which means I have to use the curvature pen tool. So what I'm going to do is just make an outline of Eurasia. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the pencil tool first. That way I can kind of have more interactivity with actually creating the superstate. So I'm going to put it underneath rivers, which I like to see. We're going to create a new layer called Eurasia. Now the book says Eurasia controls everything from Portugal to to Vladivostok. So I'm just going to paint that in. Okay, so now we got Eurasia. So let's do our label, Eurasia. Let's make it 160. Eurasia. Okay, let's do spaces. Okay, there we go. 1 out of 3 superstates done. Now we just have to add East Asia over here and Oceania over here. Let's just fast forward to that. Okay, and this is what the map looks like when it's basically done. So as you can see, I've added a whole bunch of cities. I've added names to the cities. I've added names to the different territories. I've also added some internal borders, which are pretty easy to add based off what I've already said in this video. Basically just curvature line. Then I've also added, as you can see, a frame key down here, so the title of the map, some flags, which I basically just dragged in, and some text, which is pretty easy to write. Then I've also made some third party, or I guess in this case, fourth parties, where basically the principles are just applied for these countries as well. So the Sahel Caliphate, for example, is just kind of like the other major parties, except, smaller and green. Same thing for these guys. They're basically just blobs that I erase to create a border for. I might add some other things, but besides that, the map is basically done. You could add filters and stuff like that, but I don't really have any filters. So this is the map. Okay, so now that I have a completed map, I'm going to want to export it as a PDF. Now that's a little bit difficult because my computer is not the greatest in the world, and your computer might not be the greatest in the world either. So if you have a pretty large map like this with a whole bunch of different layers, probably in the hundreds with all the titles and stuff like that, you might have to do a certain method to actually get Photoshop to export it as a PDF. So first things first, you're going to want to save it. You should probably be saving multiple times over the course of this, and make a duplicate document for printing. So as you can see, this one is 1984 map print. So what you're going to want to do is consolidate your different layers, and you can do that in a few different ways. You can create a new layer and just right click and say merge visible. Now my Photoshop is now loading. It's probably not going to work because the layers are so multitudinous. So instead what you're going to have to do is merge the layers one by one until you only have one layer left over at the end. Okay, so now I've wrangled all of my different layers into one final layer over here. If your Photoshop is having some difficulty doing that, what you could do is hide all your layers, save, exit, and re-enter, or you could do edit, purge, and then purge your histories or your clipboard. That way the Photoshop memory gets reset and you can continue without having all the luggage of all the stuff you've already done. But there's a few final changes I want to do to this. First, I think the outline borders aren't exactly lined up, so what I'm going to want to do is create a new layer, just title that map, and then I'm going to zoom in, go to the top corner, and then select basically the whole map down to the very bottom and just paint it in. Doesn't really matter too much what color or anything. Then on this map thing, I'm going to add an outer stroke of, let's make it 40, let's make it 100, 200, there we go. Make it this color, get out of the crop. Then I'm going to rasterize the layer style. So now this box has increased in its dimensions, and then I'm going to crop, and it's going to automatically click to the edge of it. Let's do unconstrained. There we go. There we go. There we go. And scroll to the bottom, and there we go. So then when we hide this, bam, and now it's even on all sides. Then we can delete this. Let's save it. And then we can do export. Okay, and this is the export screen. Now, there's a few different things you could do. Over here you can see the image size. The resample only really matters if you're going to decrease or increase the size of your image. And I don't think you really need to do this for this sort of thing. But if you did, usually the best is, I'll put it on the text, I'll put it on the screen right here. Okay, and then once you decide if you want to resize it or anything like that, you can click export, and then you save it on your desktop. Okay, then here you can see I got a PNG of my map. So everything is in order, there's no major issues, it all lines up pretty well. So I started off with this sort of map, and now I got this one. So I'd say it worked out pretty well. So if you like this sort of video, like and subscribe. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you want to get mentioned in these end credits right here. The first patron so far is user SEQ, but you can be number 2 or number 3 or something like that.